Hey, Growth Day, it's Mel. I'm really excited to be here. I love the topic of boundaries. I have millions of people that follow me between YouTube and Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter. And I don't say that to brag, TikTok. But when I asked my followers on social media, do you struggle with boundaries? 92% of my followers said that they struggle with boundaries. And I'm telling you that because if you struggle with boundaries, I want you to know you're not alone, and this is super common. And one of the reasons why I'm excited to share everything that I've learned about boundaries with you is because I used to be the kind of person that had zero boundaries. I mean, nada, nothing, zilch, nothing. In fact, there were periods of my life where it was worse than zero, because I was so attached in romantic relationships that I literally would become like a human amoeba in my romantic relationships. I mean, I was like, literally, if it's possible to have negative boundaries, meaning you like somehow go in a totally different direction, that was me. And so if somebody as insecure and as emotionally attached in relationships and as people-pleasing as me can figure out how to identify, communicate, and uphold boundaries in my life, you can learn how to do this too, okay? And so that's what we're gonna unpack in this video. So I think a big question, because a lot of people talk about boundaries, they know they need boundaries, but they don't have good boundaries. Why is that? Well, the reason why we don't have good boundaries is because none of us were trained how to set them. I mean, I want you to think about your childhood for a minute. Your childhood with your caregivers, your parents, your grandparents, whoever, it is naturally an imbalance, right? Like when you come into this world, you are born into a particular family. You're born into a particular culture, religion, economic situation, a place in the world, a race, like a religion. And based on where you were born and to whom you were born into in terms of the family structure, there were all kinds of rules that you had to follow. And if you did not follow those rules, there were consequences. And so can you imagine if you, as like an 8-year-old, started to try to express boundaries, literally like mom cooks a pot roast dinner, and you cross your arms, you're like, Mom, this is a boundary cross for me. I have decided that I am no longer eating meat. Your mom would probably go, guess what, youngster? You not eating dinner is a boundary crossing for me. You're not getting up from this table until you finish what's on your plate. And so saying boundaries when you're little doesn't really work for the adults in your life. And that's why you never learned how to do it. And by the way, your parents were probably never taught how to have boundaries either. And so I want to start at the very beginning, okay? Where do you even begin? Where do you even begin when it comes to learning how to set healthy boundaries, okay? So first things first, where you're going to begin is you're going to start to think about boundaries in a completely new way, okay? The number one mistake that we all make, I made it, you're making it right now, is when you think about boundaries, you are thinking about other people first, okay? You're thinking about boundaries and believing that your boundaries are rules in a relationship that define respect, and that somehow your boundaries are going to control or change someone else's behavior. That is the exact opposite of how you should be thinking about boundaries, okay? I didn't realize this. This is why I was lousy at setting boundaries, because I thought that my boundaries control what other people do. No, 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 no. So how do I want you to think about boundaries, okay? Boundaries are rules that you create about your own behavior. And I'm going to take this a little bit further now. What I'm actually talking about is I'm going to help you identify situations, people, any kind of experience you might find yourself in where your boundary defines what you're going to do in reaction to something that's going on around you, okay? Because I think what I'm seeing a lot of online are two things. It's this sort of quick Instagram advice where it's like, you've crossed a boundary. You're a toxic person. You're no longer in my life. when the truth is the behavior that we really need to be policing is our own. The opportunity for growth and the way that boundaries can support you is in looking at what you need to change when it comes to certain people, certain situations, or certain choices and habits that you have, okay? And we're going to unpack this, don't worry. But I really want to kind of land here, because if you start to turn the focus back on yourself, you're going to have a much easier time with applying the 5 rules around boundaries that I'm about to teach you. Okay, so rule number 1, always focus on yourself, what you will and what you won't allow, okay? Always focus on yourself, what you will and won't allow. Do not try to control other people, because you can't, okay? Think about boundaries as guardrails that you set for yourself. And I'm going to give you a quick example. We all have that relative that loves to hear them talk about politics, right? Like, it's super annoying. They're constantly going on and on about politics, okay? And you want this relative of yours to stop talking about politics around you, okay? What if I told you that expressing a boundary with a relative, telling them to stop talking about politics around you, will probably only increase the likelihood that they're going to? And so the better way to think about boundaries is not, what do I need to say to Uncle Joe so that Uncle Joe does not talk about politics around me? That's not how you do this. You don't go, Uncle Joe, you're crossing a line with me. You're crossing a boundary. I need you to stop talking about politics. Let's just role play that for a minute. How do you think that's going to work? That ain't going to work very well, is it? No, because then Uncle Joe's going to flare up, and then you're going to flare up. And now, instead of having a boundary that you held, you've got a gigantic mess that's been made. Instead, you got to think about that boundary with you, okay? What are you going to do? And there are 2 examples of this. You could decide that if that relative starts sounding off about politics, that is a boundary for you, and you will remove yourself from the room. That's an example of how you can set a boundary. Another example is you could say something to Uncle Joe, and you could say, hey, Uncle Joe, I love you, and I'd love to have you over for dinner. But if you plan on talking about politics when we're together, we're not going to have dinner. You have defined what you will tolerate and not. You didn't say, do not talk about politics. You said, I love you. If we're going to have dinner together, I'd love to have you over for dinner, but not if we're talking politics. You've given Uncle Joe the option to talk politics or not. You've just made it clear where you stand, which is, we're not having dinner together if you opt to do that. Do you see how that's about your behavior? You've made it clear what you're going to do, but Uncle Joe now has a choice to either respect the boundary or not. But actually, let me back up, because in this example, this is why this is so critical. You see, we want other people to respect our boundaries when the fact is you're the one that has to respect them. Okay? It starts with you. And so when you express it that way to Uncle Joe, and you say, I'd love to have you for dinner, but not if we're talking politics. And he's like, oh, okay. And you go, no, seriously, like, the second we talk politics, dinner's over, dude. I mean it. Oh, okay, no problem. So you've just defined what your boundary is, and he's respected it by saying, okay. He's also respected it, by the way, if he doesn't come over for dinner. But it is about you defining what works for you. Do you see that? Good.
This can be your day for personal growth. This can be that day you committed to and you remember and you go, that was the day I got myself a community. I got better coaches. I committed to making my life the absolute best that I could. This is that day. Make today your growth day. Click the button on this page and sign up right now.